Lisa was just 10 years old, yet her brown eyes held the weight of someone who had already experienced too much of life. Her hair tumbled carelessly over her shoulders, framing a gentle face that concealed a fierce resolve. Sitting at the kitchen table, she leaned over a battered notebook, her lips moving silently as she worked through a math problem. The pencil tip glided meticulously across the page, as if every line drawn was a brick being laid for a more stable future. In that small realm of graphite and paper, Lisa appeared to be an ordinary child. But deep inside, she understood she didn't have the luxury of being just that. Suddenly, the loud sound of a door slamming broke the stillness. Her father's shout pierced the room like thunder. "You always have to be right, don't you? Always finding a way to criticize everything." Her mother's voice followed, equally charged with anger. "And have you ever considered what you're destroying?" It was a cruel routine, a choreography Lisa knew all too well. Her fingers tightened around the pencil as she clung to the math problem like a lifeline. "Lisa, go to your room!" her mother yelled. Abruptly, the girl lifted her eyes slowly, pausing for a moment. "But I just wanted to finish this." Her voice emerged low, almost inaudible now. "Lisa," her father insisted, his face set with fatigue. Lisa didn't respond. She simply gathered her notebook and walked to her room, her head lowered as if bearing an invisible weight. Lisa's room was small, with walls painted a hue of blue that had long since faded. A narrow window allowed a sliver of light to filter in, illuminating makeshift shelves filled with old books. She sat on the floor, crossed her legs, and resumed writing in her notebook. "One day all of this will change," she murmured, the sound of her own voice an attempt to drown out the echoes of the arguments outside. For Lisa, math wasn't merely a subject. It was a realm where things made sense, where problems had solutions. Later, as night descended, Lisa heard footsteps outside her door. It was her mother. The door opened slowly, revealing a weary face, eyes still puffy from crying. "Is everything all right in here?" her mother asked, her voice heavy with regret. Lisa shrugged. "I'm studying, that's all." Her mother sighed as if wanting to say more, but unable to find the words. She simply closed the door again, leaving behind a trail of silence and tension. For Lisa, studying was more than just an escape. It was her lifeline, but also the key to the freedom she yearned for. She knew that with dedication and effort, she could forge a future where chaos could no longer reach her. Lisa studied with the belief that knowledge would be her strongest weapon. Her aim wasn't just to learn, it was to become someone successful and self-reliant, someone who would never again dwell in the shadow of turmoil. And as she solved yet another problem in her notebook, Lisa vowed to herself, "I will get out of here. I'll be much more than this." The classroom was where Lisa felt most alive. For her, every lesson was a chance to connect with a larger world, one where the chaos of her home couldn't touch her. Sitting in the second row with her notebook open and her eyes focused on the board, Lisa looked like just another student, but there was something unique about her, something that set her apart. It was the way her hand was always the first to shoot up, the way her mind seemed to unravel the most intricate puzzles even before the teacher finished explaining them. Miss Judith walked into the classroom, exuding her usual aura of authority. Her firm steps and stern gaze quickly silenced the students' chatter. She was a tall woman with sharp features, known for her strictness. To many, her discipline was daunting, but to Lisa, at least until then, it seemed like a reflection of her passion for mathematics. "Let's get started," announced Judith, writing a series of equations on the board. Her voice was as direct as her posture. There was no room for mistakes, much less interruptions. As Judith explained the day's lesson, Lisa absorbed every detail with absolute focus. However, something in the explanation caught her attention. The teacher had made an error while arranging part of the equation. Lisa hesitated for a moment, but her logical mind couldn't overlook the mistake. Carefully, she raised her hand, her voice low yet confident. "Excuse me, Miss Judith. I think there's an error in the formula. I believe the variable should be in the numerator, not the denominator." The room fell into complete silence. All eyes turned to Judith, who paused for a brief moment. Slowly, she turned toward Lisa, her expression hardening. "You think you know more than I do, Lisa?" she retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Lisa blinked, taken aback by the reaction. "No, ma'am. I just thought there might be a small mistake," she replied, trying to maintain a respectful tone. "A small mistake?" Judith echoed, crossing her arms and glaring at the girl. "Let me explain something to you, Lisa. I'm the teacher here. You're the student. My job is to teach, and yours is to learn. If I were wrong, which I'm not, it wouldn't be your place to correct me." Her voice was sharp, each word hitting Lisa like a blow. The girl felt her face flush but kept her head up. "Understood," Judith concluded, her expression a mix of coldness and challenge. Lisa took a deep breath and nodded, choosing not to reply. Her mind buzzed with the certainty that she was right. But arguing wouldn't lead anywhere. She lowered her eyes to her notebook, pretending to take notes as the discomfort swelled in her chest. The room remained silent, but her classmates glanced at her from the corners of their eyes, some curious, others sympathetic. Even so, Lisa maintained her composure. She wouldn't cry, not here. Judith resumed her explanation as if nothing had occurred, but there was something stiffer, harsher in her tone. Lisa heard the words, but they felt distant. She couldn't comprehend why the teacher had reacted that way. She hadn't meant to disrespect her. She had only tried to help. However, for the first time, Lisa felt that her intelligence could be as much a burden as it was a gift. When the lesson ended, Lisa packed her things in silence. While the other students left chatting, she lingered a bit longer, waiting for the room to empty. Judith, standing by the board, erased the equations with quick, precise movements, not even glancing at the girl. Lisa wanted to say something but decided against it. She walked out without looking back, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Judith, now alone in the room, paused for a moment, the eraser still in her hand. Her gaze lingered on the part of the equation Lisa had mentioned. Deep down, she knew the girl was right, but admitting it felt impossible. And as she stared at the board, she experienced a profound discomfort she couldn't name. Perhaps, behind her cold demeanor, she was beginning to realize that Lisa was much more than just a brilliant student. She was a challenge to the perfection Judith believed she embodied. The morning sun timidly filtered through the classroom windows, but the atmosphere inside was heavy. It was a new day, yet the previous day's events still loomed over Lisa and Judith like a dark cloud. Lisa entered the room, as she always did, clutching her worn-out notebook and holding her head high. Despite the tension, she refused to let it shake her. Mathematics was her passion, and nothing would change that. Judith began the lesson in her usual firm and no-nonsense tone. As she explained a new formula on the board, the teacher made another small mistake in one of her calculations. Lisa, paying close attention, noticed the error immediately. For a few seconds, she hesitated, recalling Judith's harsh reaction the day before, but true to her honesty, she raised her hand once more. "Excuse me, Miss Judith, but I think the denominator is incorrect. Wouldn't it be better to simplify before continuing the calculation?" Lisa's voice was polite, devoid of any hint of defiance. She understood her role as a student, but she couldn't ignore a mistake. Once again, the room fell silent. Her classmates exchanged tense glances, anticipating Judith's reaction. The teacher stopped writing and turned slowly. Her gaze toward Lisa was cold, filled with impatience. "You again?" Judith set the chalk down on the desk with a sharp movement. "Lisa, since you seem to know so much, how about solving something real?" Her voice was heavy with sarcasm and restrained anger. Without waiting for a reply, she turned back to the board and began writing an equation, the numbers and symbols multiplying into a sequence so complex it seemed out of place in a high school classroom. When she finished, Judith stepped aside, glaring at Lisa. "This is an advanced algebra problem, college level. Let's see if your brilliance is as great as you think. Solve it!" Her voice was sharp, like a blade cutting through the air of the room. Lisa looked at the board, then at Judith, and took a deep breath. "Miss Judith," Lisa began calmly, "with all due respect, this equation isn't part of our curriculum. I'm not required to solve it." Her voice was firm but not disrespectful. The room grew even quieter as her classmates held their breath, waiting for Judith's response. Judith took a step forward, crossing her arms. "Thank you for the lesson on the curriculum, Lisa, but here I decide what you must or must not do, and I'm telling you to solve it now." Her tone carried an undeniable challenge, as if she was determined to prove a point. Lisa hesitated for a moment, but realizing she had no choice, stood up and walked to the board with the chalk in hand. Lisa looked at the equation, her eyes scanning the numbers and symbols as if they were old acquaintances, and to everyone's surprise, she began to write. Each movement was meticulous, every line drawn with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The entire room watched in almost reverent silence as Lisa worked through the seemingly impossible equations step by step. "You know you can't solve this," Judith taunted, interrupting her process. But her voice now sounded weaker, almost insecure. Lisa didn't respond. She simply continued, focused, never taking her eyes off the board. In just a few minutes, Lisa set the chalk down and took a step back. "Solved," she said simply, looking at Judith with calm resolve. The teacher stepped closer to the board, her eyes scanning each line quickly. The solution was perfect. Flawless. Judith stood still, her face expressionless for a moment, before stepping back, stunned. The entire class erupted into murmurs of amazement. Some classmates clapped discreetly, while others simply stared at Lisa as if witnessing something extraordinary. Lisa, however, didn't use the moment to show off or jab at the teacher. With the same humility she always displayed, she walked back to her seat and opened her notebook as if nothing had happened. Judith remained motionless, staring at the board, unable to hide her shock. Lisa's intelligence was far greater than she had imagined. And at that moment, the teacher realized her attempt to humiliate the student had only highlighted the brilliance of that extraordinary mind. As much as she wanted to say something, she found no words. Judith knew she had just witnessed something unique, and it was beginning to stir something in her that she didn't yet understand. The next day began with Judith quieter than usual. She entered the classroom without her customary rigidity, her eyes scanning the faces of her students until they settled on Lisa. The girl was in her usual seat, notebook open, fully focused. Judith hesitated for a moment before starting the lesson. She knew she had to do something. She needed to talk to Lisa. When the final bell rang, marking the end of the school day, Judith asked Lisa to stay behind. The room gradually emptied, students leaving one by one until only the two of them remained. Lisa carefully packed her things without looking at the teacher. "Lisa, could you stay a little longer? I'd like to talk to you," Judith said, her voice softer than usual. Lisa nodded, sitting back down, but the silence between them was almost palpable. Judith approached, sitting in the chair next to her. For a moment, she didn't know how to begin. Taking a deep breath, she decided to be direct. "I want to apologize," she started. Lisa lifted her eyes, surprised. "Poke. What happened yesterday? In other moments, I was unfair to you. I used my authority in a way I shouldn't have, and that was wrong." Lisa looked at Judith, her brown eyes full of surprise but also caution. "It's okay, Miss Judith," she replied almost in a whisper. But Judith shook her head. "No, Lisa, it's not okay. I was wrong, and I think you deserve to hear that." The girl lowered her gaze to her notebook, fidgeting with the pencil tip. Judith, noticing her discomfort, tried to soften her tone. "You're a brilliant student, Lisa. Maybe the most brilliant I've ever taught. But I know that doesn't mean you don't have your struggles. I understand that sometimes life outside school can be difficult." Those words, spoken with such care, struck a chord deep within Lisa. She took a deep breath, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "My home isn't an easy place," she began hesitantly. "My parents fight all the time. Sometimes I try not to listen, but it's hard. They yell a lot, and it doesn't feel like it's ever going to change." She paused for a moment, gripping her pencil tightly. "That's why I study so much, because it's the only thing that makes me feel like one day I can leave, that I can have a different life." Judith felt a pang in her chest. Every word Lisa spoke carried a silent pain, a pain she recognized more than she cared to admit. "Lisa, I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't know school was the only place where you could find peace." Lisa gave a faint smile, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "School is where I can build something, Miss Judith. Something of my own. At home, there's no room for that. But here, with books, with numbers, it feels like I can control something. At least a little." Judith couldn't respond right away. She felt overwhelmed by the maturity of the girl, by the strength behind so much pain. "You're very strong, Lisa," she finally said. I see that now, not just in your intelligence, but in the way you handle all of this, and I promise I won't be an obstacle for you anymore." Lisa looked at the teacher, and for a moment, it seemed a genuine connection had formed between them. "Thank you, Miss Judith," she said simply. Her voice carried gratitude, but also something more. A small sense of relief, as if someone had finally acknowledged the weight she bore. At night, Judith couldn't sleep. Lisa's words echoed in her mind. The girl had a strength that few adults could muster, and Judith knew she could no longer be part of the weight Lisa carried. For the first time, Judith felt she wasn't just a teacher. She was someone who had the chance to make a difference in the life of an extraordinary student, and she was determined to do so. So Judith walked into the classroom the next day with a new demeanor. There was something different about her expression, a determined look that blended admiration and purpose. She knew she needed to do something for Lisa, something that went beyond simply recognizing her brilliance. Judith had spent the entire night thinking about how to help this extraordinary girl, and now she finally had a plan. After the lesson ended, Judith asked Lisa to stay behind. Once again, the girl, though curious, seemed more at ease than the day before. "Leave me. Lisa, I'd like to talk to you about something important," Judith began, her voice accompanied by a rare smile. Lisa nodded, resting her hands on the desk. "Have you ever heard of the National Mathematics Competition?" Judith asked. Lisa shook her head. "No, Miss Judith, what is it?" Judith explained. "It's an annual competition for exceptional math students. It's an incredible opportunity, Lisa. The winners receive scholarships to some of the best schools in the country. I immediately thought of you. You have everything it takes to win." Lisa's eyes widened. For a moment, she was speechless. "I've never participated in anything like that," she confessed. "But am I really good enough?" Judith leaned forward, looking directly into Lisa's eyes. "Lisa, you're one of the brightest minds I've ever encountered. This competition is made for people like you. But it won't be easy. It will require hard work, dedication, and courage." Lisa felt her heart race. It was an opportunity that could change her life, but at the same time, a challenge that felt daunting. "I don't know, Miss Judith, if I fail," she asked, her voice almost inaudible. For the first time, Judith placed her hand over Lisa's, a rare gesture of empathy. "You won't fail, Lisa. But even if you don't win, just trying will be a huge step. Trust me, I'll be with you every step of the way." Convinced by Judith's firm and sincere tone, Lisa accepted the challenge. Over the following days, the two began working together. Judith dedicated extra hours after school, preparing Lisa with problems that ranged from advanced calculations to mathematical puzzles that required creativity and logical reasoning. Lisa, in turn, threw herself fully into her studies, showing a determination that only deepened Judith's admiration. "You're ready for this," Judith said one evening as they worked together on a particularly tough problem. "More than ready, in fact. You have something that can't be taught, Lisa. Natural talent. Now we just need to polish it." Lisa smiled for the first time without hesitation. "Thank you, Miss Judith. I'd never have the courage to try without you." When the day of the competition arrived, Lisa was nervous but confident. Judith accompanied her to the venue, a large room filled with young participants from all over the country. The atmosphere was intimidating, but Lisa took a deep breath and entered, carrying with her the silent support of her teacher. Judith watched from a distance, unable to contain the pride she felt. The test was challenging, as expected. Lisa approached each question like a puzzle, her hands moving quickly and precisely. There were moments when she seemed to falter, but she quickly found her way. When she finally finished, Lisa left the room exhausted, but with a sparkle in her eyes. "How did it go?" Judith asked, trying to hide her anxiety. "I did my best," Lisa replied with a small smile. The award ceremony was filled with tension, names being called one by one until the presenter announced, "And the first place goes to Lisa Smith." The room erupted into applause, but to Lisa, the sound felt distant. She looked at Judith, who smiled with tears in her eyes. At that moment, Lisa realized she had won not just the competition, but also her own doubts and fears. As Lisa climbed the stage to receive her award, Judith felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine pride, not just as a teacher, but as someone who had been part of something extraordinary. Lisa held the trophy with trembling but steady hands, looking out at the audience with a mix of joy and disbelief. And there, on that stage, she knew her future was changing forever. On their way back home, Lisa turned to Judith and said, "I couldn't have done it without you." Judith shook her head. "You could have, Lisa. I just helped you see what you were already capable of doing." But in that moment, both of them knew that the day marked not only an academic victory, but the beginning of something much greater. Something that would change both Lisa's and Judith's lives. Lisa's days now began early. But this time, she wasn't heading to the small neighborhood school where she had grown up. Winning the mathematics competition had brought about a monumental change. A full scholarship to one of the most prestigious schools in the country, known for its advanced resources and highly qualified teachers, and as a springboard to the top universities. This institution represented a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Lisa understood the uniqueness of this chance, but also knew it came with challenges. As soon as she arrived, Lisa felt the overwhelming impact of being in such a different environment. The school was monumental, with wide corridors, digital boards, and classrooms that looked more like tech laboratories. Students in immaculate uniforms gathered in small groups, many speaking with refined accents and exuding an air of confidence. With her worn-out backpack and weathered notebook, Lisa felt slightly out of place, but she held her head high. She had fought hard to get there, and she wouldn't let the unfamiliar surroundings intimidate her. The first few classes were challenging. Despite being a brilliant student, Lisa faced advanced material and a frenetic pace of learning. Most of the students had a solid foundation built in elite schools. At times, Lisa felt the weight of the pressure. "I don't belong here," she thought as she reviewed her notes alone in the library. But whenever doubt crept in, she remembered Judith's words, their late-night study sessions, and her teacher's unwavering encouragement. "You're more than capable," Lisa echoed in her mind. As the weeks passed, Lisa began to find her footing. It wasn't just her intelligence that stood out, but her determination and humility. Teachers quickly noticed the brilliance of her mind, while some classmates, initially distant, began to respect her. During a physics class, when Lisa answered a complex question no one else could solve, one student remarked, "Are you like a genius or something?" Lisa offered a faint smile but felt a bit more confidence grow inside her. The challenges weren't limited to academics. Socializing in this new environment was equally demanding. Lisa, used to eating lunch alone or with a small group of friends, now had to navigate a space where social connections seemed as important as academic performance. At first, many of the students saw her as the scholarship girl. But Lisa, with her kindness and authenticity, began to change that perception. A classmate named Sophia, who initially seemed aloof, approached her after a group activity. "You're really talented, Lisa. Want to study together after class?" That was the beginning of a friendship that helped Lisa feel less alone. Despite her new connections, Lisa stayed in regular contact with Judith. Every Saturday, the two met to discuss school and new challenges. Judith, who was now more than just a teacher, had become a mentor and a friend. "They're so advanced, Miss Judith. Sometimes I feel like I'll never catch up to them," Lisa confessed during one of their conversations. Judith smiled and shook her head. "Lisa, you've already proven you can overcome any obstacle. Remember, it's not about knowing everything immediately. It's about continuing to try." Judith's words always had a profound impact on Lisa. Gradually, she began to see challenges as opportunities. She started taking advantage of the school's resources, attending extra classes, joining science clubs, and even participating in internal competitions. Lisa turned her difficulties into fuel, and every small achievement felt like a personal victory. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but step by step she was growing stronger. One cold evening, sitting in her dormitory, Lisa opened her notebook and reread the notes from her time studying with Judith. Among the formulas and scribbles lay the essence of everything that had brought her to that point: effort, dreams, and the people who had believed in her. As she looked out the window at the starry sky, Lisa felt a deep sense of certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The years passed like a whisper, but for Lisa, each day was a careful step in building something greater. The young girl with messy hair and dreamy eyes had become a determined woman, carrying purpose in her gaze, the mark of everything she had overcome. The leap from the prestigious school to an elite university had been natural, almost inevitable, thanks to her unparalleled talent and relentless hard work. Now, in her early 30s, Lisa was a successful entrepreneur, leading one of the country's most innovative social projects. In an imposing conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, Lisa adjusted the microphone on her sleek blazer. Around her, respected professionals waited attentively as she prepared to present her latest project, a program offering excellent education to gifted children from low-income backgrounds. It was an ambitious initiative, but Lisa wasn't known for settling for anything less than extraordinary. "When I was a child," she began, her voice firm but laden with emotion, "I didn't know if I could change my reality. The one thing was always clear. I believed that knowledge was my best chance. Now, I want to provide that same opportunity to other children because I know how much it can transform lives." As she spoke, memories flooded her mind like flashes. She remembered the sound of arguments at home, the scribbled notebooks in her cramped room, and most of all, the competition that had changed her life. Above all, she thought of Judith, the teacher who, despite her initial flaws, had become a cornerstone of her journey. It was Judith who had helped her see her worth, and Lisa knew the impact of a single supportive gesture could resonate for generations. Lisa's project, called Bridge to the Future, wasn't just about teaching math or science. It aimed to give children what she had always sought, a safe space where their talents could be recognized and nurtured. The program's enrollment was open to children from all over the country, especially those from vulnerable backgrounds. With every new participant, Lisa saw a piece of herself, the sparkle in their eyes, the hunger to learn, and sometimes the pain of those who already carried the weight of the world. But Lisa's success wasn't measured only in awards or the impact of her projects. She had become an inspiration to thousands. Magazines dubbed her the genius of social solutions and a visionary in education. But Lisa always rejected the focus on her personal story. For her, the real stars were the children who, like her, once fought to change their realities. Despite her packed schedule, Lisa made it a priority to participate actively in the program's activities. She taught, mentored, and most importantly, listened. During one conversation with an 8-year-old boy who excelled in science, he asked her, "How did you manage to leave where you were?" Lisa smiled, remembering the 10-year-old version of herself lost among notebooks and dreams. "With a lot of effort," she replied, "and because I had people who believed in me. Now it's your turn to believe." Even with her life now surrounded by success and recognition, Lisa never forgot where she came from. Whenever she returned to the town where she grew up, she made it a point to visit the places that had shaped her childhood. On her last visit, she walked through the halls of the old school where it had all begun. Looking at the narrow corridors and worn-out desks, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. There, she had learned more than math. She had discovered her own strength. That night, as she reviewed reports in her office, Lisa came across an old notebook among the books on her shelf. It was the same one she used while studying with Judith, filled with annotations and scribbled equations. She ran her fingers over the yellowed pages and smiled, remembering the girl who had once dared to dream. That notebook was more than an object. It was a symbol of everything she had achieved and everything she still hoped to build. And though Lisa was now a public figure with fame and influence, her essence remained the same. The girl who believed in the power of knowledge. It was a sunny afternoon, and Lisa was preparing for a special event. Her project, Bridge to the Future, had reached a significant milestone, the enrollment of its 1,000th child. To celebrate, a symbolic ceremony had been organized, bringing together past mentors, partners, and participants in the program. The occasion reflected everything Lisa had built, but for her, it represented something even greater. A chance to prove that knowledge truly was a bridge to a better future. The auditorium was packed, and the atmosphere was filled with admiration and anticipation. Lisa stepped onto the stage with the same humility that had accompanied her throughout her journey, thanking the people who had made the project possible. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the audience, and then she saw a face she hadn't expected. Judith, the former teacher, sat in one of the back rows, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on Lisa. Time had left its marks, gray hair, and deeper lines of expression. Yet something about Judith's posture, the intensity in her eyes, remained unchanged. Lisa felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't seen Judith in years, but it was impossible to forget the person who had so profoundly impacted her life, both through conflict and through the support that had come later. After her speech, as guests moved around to greet her, Lisa walked over to Judith. The teacher stood up slowly, her face softening with a tentative smile. "You've done something extraordinary, Lisa," Judith said, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't miss the chance to see what you've built." Lisa was silent for a moment, trying to process the flood of emotions washing over her. "Miss Judith," she began, with a smile that conveyed more gratitude than words ever could. "I never thought we'd meet again like this, but I'm so glad you came." Judith took a deep breath as if gathering the courage to say something she had held back for years. "I never imagined it either. But Lisa, before anything else, I need to apologize for how I treated you in the beginning. I was wrong, and though I tried to make up for it later, I know I was harsher than you deserved." Judith's words were genuine, filled with both regret and relief. Lisa nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "You were wrong, yes," she said with a light smile. "But you also taught me so much, not just about math, but about resilience, about standing up for what I believe in. And in the end, you believed in me when I needed it most." Judith felt tears welling up but held them back. "I knew you were special, Lisa, from the very first day, but I was so caught up in my own insecurities that it took me too long to see what really mattered. Seeing you here today only confirms what I always knew. You were ahead of us all, even when I couldn't keep up." Lisa extended her hand, but Judith pulled her into an embrace. It was a moment rich with meaning, the convergence of two lives that had intersected in unexpected ways. For Lisa, the gesture was the closing of an important chapter. For Judith, it was redemption, the chance to fully acknowledge the impact Lisa had had on her life. After the embrace, Lisa invited Judith to join her on stage. "I'd like everyone to meet someone who was instrumental in my journey," she said, holding Judith's hand. The audience erupted into applause, and Judith felt a mix of embarrassment and pride. "This is Miss Judith, who taught me far more than mathematics. She was the one who planted the first seeds of everything I've built." Judith hesitated as she took the microphone, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure I deserve this," she began, "but looking at Lisa and everything she's accomplished, I realize that sometimes a teacher's role isn't just to teach, but also to learn from their students. Lisa taught me something I'll never forget, that believing in someone's potential can change lives, and she changed mine." The applause reverberated throughout the auditorium, but for Lisa and Judith, that moment was more than a public celebration. It was an exchange of recognition, a confirmation that their journeys had been deeply and transformatively intertwined. When the ceremony ended, the two walked side by side, chatting like old friends. Before parting ways, Judith turned to Lisa. "You haven't just built a future for yourself, Lisa. You're building futures for thousands of children, and that's something the world will never forget." Lisa smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I learned that from you, Miss Judith, to believe in human potential, even when it seems difficult." As Judith walked away, Lisa looked out at the horizon, feeling a profound peace. Her reunion with Judith had closed an important chapter in her life, but it also opened doors for new beginnings. At that moment, she knew her journey was far from over. It was only